set this on record right here.
Okay.
And yeah, how's your day been? Let's start over like we haven't been talking at all.
It's good, thank you. It's the end of term, so I think everyone's feeling
Yeah,
tired but excited for the summer.
there's also something about the winter term that's it's more pacey. In a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking about that a few days ago, where I feel like after the summer,
Uh-huh.
I get really excited to come back to school and to do research. But then by the time January comes, I think I have energy, but you realize very quickly that you're getting tired. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, it's nice how you just mentioned how you come here and do research and you're all excited about it. How was it like back when you were in the Lekwungen? Is that how you say it?
The Lekwungen territory.
Lekwungen territory. How was it back there, and how different was it for you to move to go to University of Victoria for your bachelor's? What was that transition phase?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I grew up in Victoria, on the Lekwungen territory. I'm a non-Indigenous academic, and UVic was essentially the only option I saw to be able to go to university, which I'm very thankful for. I really enjoyed my time there, my undergrad studies. It definitely took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do. I think it took me like 10 years. No, that's a lie. About 8 years to finish my undergrad. I kept on leaving and coming back, and had to do a lot of summer school because just of how hard it is to juggle so many classes when you're also trying to work. No, actually 6 years. Sorry, I'm really bad at math. So a qualitative researcher, as you can tell. But yeah, I enjoyed it, but I think nobody really prepared me the undergrad level for the change in expectations when you go into undergrad classes from high school to undergrads. I think that for me was a big shift. It took me a while to find my footing with that and figure out how to learn in an education system that wasn't really the easiest thing for me for the first few years. But
yes, I mean I was also here in a different course when I got here first. I was in computer science, and then I switched to a bachelor's of fine arts. And yeah, I'm gonna be here for 6 years, I'd say myself too. So yeah, I completely get where you're coming from here. And also just the fact that there was not a lot of exposure to fine arts for me back in India. And so it was only, and my parents, for them to be convinced. So it was only once I got here that I fully got to know about what this degree could also be about, and why I think it's more of a gem for me.
Yeah, and you found your passion, I imagine, too.
Yes, I've always been passionate about creative arts and all of that. I used to do a lot of performing arts back in high school, in middle school too. And so yeah, I've just been engrossed in the arts ever since.
Cool.
Yeah. But coming back to education, how was it? And then you did your master's in Dalhousie. And so that's a different province altogether.
The complete opposite side of the country.
and then you do your PhD in Queen's University in Ontario.
Yeah.
So that's quite a bit that you've traveled around for education. So how would you say that your education experience and like learning experience was different in all these places?
That's a really interesting question. And I feel like as somebody who ended up going into and now works in geography, perhaps it's going to be sort of obvious that I say that geography really impacted those, how it was in place. I was really lucky to have some exposure to research opportunities when I was an undergrad student at UVic. And that's actually what ended up leading me eventually to Dalhousie, was to work with a professor there who had created opportunities for me at an undergrad level, and then said, hey, would you like continuing to do this work through Dalhousie, where they got a job at the time. But the work, even though I was sort of doing a master's in Dalhousie and doing all the coursework there, the research itself was still on Vancouver Island. So it was, which is part of the beauty of grad school, of course, is you can, do work in vastly different places. You can learn from so many different people. You have an opportunity to be able to go to different places. But one thing that really stuck with me when I moved to Mi'kmaq territory in Halifax was having a conversation with some scholars who had been involved in a lot of legal work there, and a lot of my research at the time was on what are called modern treaties here in BC. And I remember them saying that the sort of treaty context in the Maritimes was completely different than the sort of questions that were happening in BC at the time. and continue to happen. And I didn't really, I kind of knew what that meant, but I didn't fully get what that meant until I got more involved with organizing and more involved with classes and discussions and stuff with folks out east. So I say that because of the history of those places, the geography of the places that I've done my degrees really sort of influenced and expanded my own perspective and understanding of approaching some of these topics. And same thing with when I went to Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territories, because it was, they have a geography program there that I had sort of followed a lot of the profs in that department for a long time. So I was very excited when I got to do my PhD there. But again, such a different place. Like you're in the middle of, you're obviously on the Great Lakes. You have, Toronto here, you have Montreal here, Ottawa here. There's trains. Like that's something I'd never really experienced growing up in BC. And yeah, I found a lot of the discussions there, again, very different than in BC, but again, I learned a lot, and I still have those sort of relationships with people even now, despite me being back in British Columbia as well.
Yeah, well, living away from the place that you grew up in, it really also brings up a kind of appreciation for the place in your heart, I'd say.
Yeah.
Is that what brought you back to BC eventually?
Yeah, there's a few things with that. I was going to say appreciate, but also for me, like also growing up on an island. I remember the first time we got old enough to like leave the island on our own, and we were driving a car and we got off the ferry. And I had a realization at that moment. I was like, we could drive to the tip of South America if we wanted to. Like, we just like, I never left the island when I was a kid. We didn't have the money. It wasn't really a thing that you necessarily did. So like, it just, my understanding of like what was reachable, like even geographically in terms of the physical geography of a place was huge. But yeah, moving back to BC, all my work, my research has been, I should say, the majority of it with communities here in British Columbia. And as much as I know I wanted to leave when I was younger, I also knew that, all my family's still here on the island. My research partnerships are here. As I mentioned beforehand, when I had that undergrad opportunity to do research, that I then continued doing that at Dalhousie, even though I was doing research in British Columbia.
Okay.
It was the same thing with my master's. I was continuing to work with the same community on the island in New Channel territory. And I did my PhD with the same community. So even though I was in Ontario and doing the coursework and going through the sort of institutional steps there, I was, focusing on context so unraveling here in British Columbia. So yeah, when the position here at UBC Okanagan opened up a few years ago, I've been here for about 5 years, I think. 5 years. I was really excited to be able to obviously have a more permanent position in British Columbia, but also to be attached to a university that did have such an emphasis on research, like UBC does. So yeah, it was a few both personal and professional reasons that I ended up landing back here. So.
These are very fascinating experiences that you've had, traveling quite a bit by yourself, and then it's I mean, not only to me, but like everyone who's studying here must really be fascinated and really wants to get out there just like then and have such inclination towards the subject. And then you get back to BC, and then the first course that you teach is a second-year course called Geographies of BC. What's that about?
Yeah, it probably sounds fairly obvious in some ways. But so before I came to UBC Okanagan, I did what's called a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Northern British Columbia in Prince George. And it was there that I first taught Geographies of BC. So I was really happy when I saw it as an offering here at UBC Okanagan, because I love teaching that class. And a lot of it, when I first taught it, was looking at some of the specific geographies of places across British Columbia, because, we think of BC as this coherent entity, but it's actually something that's been constructed by particular political and legal decisions. In some ways, in terms of like a physical region, it's quite arbitrary. If you look at literally look at the lines of the province, of course, some of it in Alberta follows the Rockies, but the other one is just a straight line and then the 49th parallel, which was created for political means at a very particular time. So when I was able to teach that class, which I actually just taught it earlier today as well, I wanted to encourage students from all different backgrounds to think critically with tools that geography offers, to be able to think of what we often call the social geography, the political geography, the economic geography, the resource geography, looking at Indigenous rights and title here in BC, to be able to like engage with the province and to provide sort of geographic tools for people to be able to do that. So one of the first things I did when I redesigned the course is remove the prerequisites for the class. So anybody from any sort of academic background can take this class.
That's nice.
Because I just wanted to be able to have people who have their own different lived experiences and have their own sort of experiences and understandings of different regions of BC, because they're so different. You know, Huron-Steel Territory is different from, you know, the territories that are just next to us in the Kootenay region, or in terms of Vancouver Island, or the Lower Mainland, or Northern BC. Like, it's all so different. So I think the Geographies of BC sort of capsule, if you will, allows us to look at all those topics in really interesting ways. And it's sort of morphed. Now I take an approach where we introduce students to sort of critical theoretical topics, such as systemic racism, which was a huge part of creating British Columbia, settler colonialism, which remains obviously a hot topic in BC today, as you know, systemic racism as well. And looking at all of these sort of critical topics, including climate justice, to help students sort of look at the history into the present of the province and to make sense of some of what's going on. And again, to introduce to those critical skills that geography has. So.
No, that's completely fair. And it's, in a way, I think the things that this course has, it's almost like you're giving back to the place that you have learned so much from. It's like a full circle.
Exactly.
Because you've researched so much in your studying years, and now the first course that you teach here, or the first course that you teach and anyone can take, which is a second year course, is about the geographies of BC. And I think that's very nice how people like me who are from so far away from BC and won't even have known anything about BC, this opportunity, and just the fact that it doesn't have any prerequisites, also very interesting. And it might interest a lot of people, people who would want to know about history and the geographies of BC. My next question is about this next course that you teach, 358, gender, place, and culture. How do you think that relates with the first course, the Geographies of BC?
Yeah, excellent question. I tend to try to take, and I don't always do the best job, but an intersectional perspective to teaching. So looking at how, I am a critical geographer, so looking at how different aspects of one's identity and or power structures sort of play off each other, and how that intersects with each other. That's ideas that largely came from Black feminist traditions. So I say that because when I teach gender, place, and culture, we take that approach to the work, but of course, gender operates in place, and culture also obviously impacts that as well. So when I first started teaching that class, I wanted to make sure that I was bringing in different perspectives, of course, which is what I do for all of my classes. The readings are by people, or if it's readings, or if it's podcasts, or if it's documentaries, I always strive to ensure there are voices of people with lived experience of the topics we're looking at. So in geography, in the Geog 217 Geographies of BC, for instance, we watch a historic documentary series which profiles the work and experiences of people with lived experiences in addition to academics, and some of people with lived experiences who are also academics, who speak about certain topics from that very nuanced perspective. And I take the same approach with gender, place, and culture. So there's a lot of encouraging students to sort of reflect on their experiences in different places. For instance, some of the activities we have for gender, place, and culture include going out in public and writing written reflections of how you see gender operating within different spaces. So to give an example, For instance, one student, and I'll keep this confidential, of course, in terms of their name, but I remember in their written reflection, and they shared this with the class, they said, like, I went to a large retail market, and I think it was Costco or something like that. And they said, I didn't expect there to be any gender in a store. I'm just going to the store. So they went to the kids' items, and they're like, lo and behold, everything was gendered. There were colors like indicating what were supposed to be, certain people's toys, and just the way that it was allocated, the images on the packages. Of course, same thing with clothing. And that's sort of a small example, but I provide it because it was really illuminating to see students sort of reflecting on their own sort of everyday experiences in the spaces that they might interact with or navigate, and to be able to bring in the course material that we're talking about to try to help them understand those perspectives, or understand those sort of experiences perhaps from a different angle. And then that intersectional perspective, of course, brings in perspectives of folks who may not be the people who are doing those reflections, to be able to learn from other people's experiences and places and how that changes. And we do the same, although I do have slightly different activities in the Geography of BC class, where students are asked to pick different regions of the province so that they can engage different topics that they're interested in. And many times students pick topics that have impacted their everyday lives, I think because they start seeing themselves in the course material, or start seeing places that are familiar to them, or places that they want to learn more about, which I always love as a teacher, like being able for students to find their excitement and passion, and to be able to bring that through in the course material.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. And how about outside of the course, like, how does your positionality personally and your personality influences this, your style of research, your style of dispensing knowledge too? How do you think that affects things?
That's a great question. I think for me, I recognize in many ways my knowledge is inherently limited. And I think as academics, or I should say experiences, but as academics, as professors with PhD, I think people often think that we're sort of the pinnacle experts that know particular things. We've of course had the privilege of being able to read and write and think, and I think like the time to actually think and reflect is just like, there's so much privilege and luck in that. Like I love the summers in part because there is that space to be able to read and think and write and just like actually work through materials. And I say that though because for me, as somebody who teaches from an intersectional perspective, like it does come down to what may be blind spots within my own experiences and knowledge. So for instance, when we first started, I said I grew up in the Lekwungen territory, but I'm a non-Indigenous researcher. My family's primarily of Irish and Scottish ancestries. I also, identify as queer and as genderqueer. And I say that because I think my experiences invariably come into those in the classroom settings. And some students with shared experience will be able to talk about particular things in ways that might resonate, of course, with the material we're looking at, but also their lived experience. But for other students, they may have a different experience and they may not feel or see the same thing in the same way, which is okay. Like the purpose isn't for everybody to believe the same thing. But I say that because that's part of my approach with any sort of teaching is, and I have this on my syllabus, are taking a sort of citational justice based approach where the people who are readings are the ones with the lived and professional expert knowledges in different topics, so that we are reading from people who are sort of thinking critically about multiple different topics from often nuanced perspectives, and thinking about who is able to make knowledge, who is able and has the power to be able to have their voices heard. And in Geographies of BC, for instance, and even in Gender, Place, and Culture, we learned that that's not always been equal, and it still isn't equal, right? So I always try to make that visible in my classes so that students can reflect and think critically about not only what they're learning, but who they're learning from, who they're learning with, who has had the power to be able to quote unquote create knowledge. I don't know why I'm saying quote unquote, but that's to create knowledge, to mobilize knowledge, to share perspectives, And like even in BC, certain people weren't able to vote for a long time. And it was only until, relatively recently that certain populations in the province could vote. But that may seem like a small point, but then it's who's the representational government, who could actually own property, who could have certain forms of employment. Like all of these things continue to have reverberations across the province and across how we interact with one another. And I think that's something that I always sort of hold in my mind when I try to approach my classes, so that students are able to see where limitations may be in what we're talking about as well.
Oh, yeah. That's yeah. I mean, now I want to take this class. It's yeah. There's you talk to so many people, and like now that with the podcast, I'm talking with so many professors. I'm realizing how much I don't know, and it's very interesting to know about BC in general too. Like I didn't know this fact that till a very long time, a certain sect was not allowed to vote. That's
yeah. I believe. Oh, I'm bad with numbers. I look at the camera. Because, people. I always tell people to Google this because if I get it wrong, yeah, like women weren't able to vote until the 1910s, and even then, only particular women were able to vote, primarily white European women.
Okay.
And there's more women, but there's lots of different exclusions there. Chinese folks weren't able to vote for quite a long time in British Columbia. Same thing with Indigenous folks or First Nations folks with status weren't able to vote until the 1960s. So there's sort of, we trace this, and again, very bad with numbers. So apologies for getting some of those numbers wrong and being somewhat vague. I always have to look at my notes for that. But with a lot of the classes, when I share that, it's yes, the numbers are important, but I also think with this age of AI, like anyone can Google, when could particular people vote? But what I'm always interested in when I share the class is being like, well, what does this tell us? And what could be ongoing impacts from these systemic dynamics that have disproportionately impacted certain populations? And what did that mean at particular, moments in time when things were changing? So I think putting those questions, those facts, if you will, in context is always helpful, I think, to encourage students to sort of think of the connectivity of the broader relationships, the geographies, if you will, of how different policies, different structures impacted different populations at different times.
So. This is one thing that I really like about Kelowna too. Like it's really very connected to its roots, and you can get this kind of knowledge and know more about the history, like facets like these in Kelowna. Despite the fact that there's so many international students and people coming from all over, and you can still get to know about it. At first, it felt like very saturated to me, the place Kelowna, but it's only now that I'm beginning to realize that the culture here is deep and there's a lot of meaning in it. Yeah, and it's only now that I feel like after being here for 3 years, it's only now that I'm feeling like I'm starting to know the place better. But street food's still a problem, I'd say, in Kelowna, because there's no street food.
No.
Yeah, it's not a very good first impression about a city.
No,
barely a city, but I mean, you come to a city and the first thing that you ingest about it is the food. And my first meal here was Tim Hortons. Speaks a lot about the culture too.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, like with street food, it's kind of this whole thing with there being no sort of street food is also kind of symbolic how history has been taken over, and there's so many things that don't exist anymore because some people chose to not show it to the rest of the world. It's very interesting. My next question, out of complete curiosity, is what's queer geography like? Because it's one subject that I'd never heard of. For someone like a layman as me, could you throw some light on what queer geography is and what are the domains that branch from it?
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. And thank you for that question. As I feel like a lot of the students and even myself, I'm continuously learning what queer geographies are, and a lot of the students who come to the class are often, figuring that out as well as we go through the course. So yeah, Queer Geographies is a class that we now have of what we call equivalent. So it's listed between gender, women's sexuality studies and geography. I think it's 426.
Yes, it is.
Again, thank you. See me and my numbers, like dates, numbers, correspondence. So Queer Geographies is a relatively new-ish field. I'd say it became more popular within the field of geography within the early 2000s, later 2000s, and it stemmed from a sort of arm of geography, of human geography, that was looking at sexuality in space, and particularly looking at sort of gay and lesbian experiences in different spaces. And that really emerged from the 80s, 90s. I think it became most popular when there were folks who were gay and lesbian geographers who were able to progress that work and to be in the academy and to do that sort of research and engagement. So what Queer Geographies has sort of shifted into is a combination of what's called queer theory, which emerged really in the early 1990s, and geography. So looking at sort of some of the spatial tools that geography offers, not just maps. I know everyone thinks it's just maps. To think about people experiencing spaces. And yes, of course, it does look at gender and sexuality, but it also takes, at least from how I engage with it and how I understand it, is engaging with the word queer, is recognizing it means, and historically has meant different. And it's actually for a certain part of the 2SL LGBTQIA+ community, it's actually seen as a derogatory term for folks who might be in their 60s and 70s in particular, because it was used essentially as a slur. It wasn't a good thing. And there's been a shift within recent generations where, including myself, who take that term and have sort of tried to take it back and to use it as a way of sort of signifying the vastness of sexual orientation and vastness of gender identity, and also sort of a resistive capabilities. So I say that because queer geography, yes, of course, looks at gender and sexuality, but we also take, again, that intersectional perspective to look at how gender, sexuality, but also what society tells us should be normal, and question all of those things. So, and how spaces may co-constitute that. So how it's sort of being created and reinforced at the same time. So people often, we talk about everything from, again, of course, gender and sexuality, but also accessibility, looking at disability justice, looking at the experiences and work of, trans folks of color, looking at different topics related to sort of the environment and different legislation in terms of how that impacts people's bodies in different ways. And I think students start, once we frame it and reframe it as looking at sort of this process of normalization and challenging this sense of normalcy, which often comes from a place of power, right? Somebody telling somebody to be a particular way. And we then look at how communities are enacting ways of being otherwise that really sort of lift up each other and provide sort of a liberatory, supportive, resistive, transformative, transformational context. So it takes a while for us to get on the same page in queer geographies, which I love. Like that's a part I expect every time I teach the class, in part because there's always students who come from gender, women's sexuality studies, and they have, great amount of training on sort of the more critical theory, gender, queer theory, sort of post-structuralist language. And we also have geographers who are more experienced and knowledgeable within the sort of spatial aspects of critical inquiry, thinking about power within a different context, within a more material context, I guess you could say. Not to say that, not to create a binary in terms of those different disciplines, but I say that because we come to a certain place where we're both sort of on a similar page at a certain point. And it's really powerful, I think, in that class to see how students who are also from different disciplines outside of those two bring what they learn in their lived experience into sort of sharing with one another, and how the materials that we read really, again, shed light on different perspectives, both discipline-wise, but also in terms of lived experiences and sort of navigating resisting power dynamics, and the really sort of beautiful, hopeful messages that can come from that. Because I think, it's a pretty heavy time right now, and I think having those sort of hopeful, critical, uplifting, radically transformative messages is really powerful. And
that's the beauty of university life in general, like people coming from all over the globe, and then a culmination of perspectives, and then you trying to form your own perspective, carve your own sculpture out of it. I think that's what I like most about me being here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think this class, Geography 4 to 6, upholds that spirit quite well. And have you ever felt like you should be more of a student sometimes in your tenure as a professor? Have you ever been faced with a moment where you're like, oh, I need to take a step back and think about this perspective that's been brought to me, and made you question and made you ponder more on your past work?
Yeah, I feel like I have those interactions every day, and with students constantly. Like, I feel like I learn sometimes the most, particularly from grad students who are doing the reading now, are thinking critically about questions, who are doing, asking really important, challenging, complex questions. And I feel like I am continuously learning from students as I go through any course or any sort of talk. And I always say, and I know this sounds really corny, but I think I firmly believe this for myself. Like, I have not been able to revisit my master's thesis. I have not been able to look at my PhD dissertation really again. And part of that is because I feel like if I write something and then I still can look back at it and be like, everything I say in this is 100% of how I would do it now, I'm not doing something right.
Right.
Because I think within my role, that's not to say that I don't try to ensure my research is very rigorous and, and upholds all the things that we need and are trained to do as researchers, but the way that my thinking sort of changes and evolves and continues to change and evolve, and consistently trying to make sure that I reflect on what I'm learning and what I'm hearing from other people. So yeah, I'd say that all the time I'm learning more, which is also part of the amazing part about this job, is like being able to perpetually learn and essentially having to perpetually learn. And even the feedback I get from students, like I often do mid-course evaluations where I ask students to provide reflections on the course so far, and I don't ask them to put their names on it or anything, but like, how are things going, what can be improved? And it's like a legitimate ask for feedback in an anonymous fashion, so that if students are like, I'm not really, there's too many readings, I can't keep up, or there's you're talking too much, I want to make sure we have more interaction in small groups. Those things are actually super beneficial. I mean, that's different from the learning aspect, but I say that because then it like being able to adjust your approach as a teacher to make sure that people feel like they're all able to really show up and engage with the material in good ways. And I just use those two examples because I've heard the first one about the amount of readings and really try to take it seriously, because with students I always say, like, if there's too much, then let's reduce the readings, because I'd rather you really being able to dive into this material and to think about it deeply, rather than like looking for depth rather than breadth, right? Because for me, I know that's where I learn the most, is by actually having time to like dive into a paper or to a topic or a discussion, and to be like, well, this line, like I didn't really get what this line said. Does anyone want to help me understand it? Which I feel like those kind of discussions are some of the most valuable. And I feel like I know I wasn't necessarily taught as a student that a valuable contribution in class could be like, hey, I don't understand what this means on this page, can we talk about it? And that's actually like, I'm learning, and I've learned like hugely beneficial to be able to hear other people's perspectives, and to know that people might be reading something differently, and how generative that process can be, even for myself, as I'm continuously relating and learning to text differently and being able to read them on a different level.
Yeah, that's a very Yeah, I think that's a very general and a very versatile kind of perspective about not only in the academic side of things, but about you not being able to look back at your master's thesis or PhD thesis, because I feel like even in the arts, I mean that's the domain that I'm in, so I'm trying to relate facets of this with what I'm in right now. I think one getting I'm sorry about that. One getting irrelevant is really very important for the growth of the industry that you're in.
Yeah.
Like if you're creating art for more than 15 years and you keep making movies, and after 10 movies if even if your 10th movie is still the same hit that it was 10 years ago or like 10 films ago, then you're doing something wrong and you're not giving back to the community of film. And so I think that's very important to uphold this ever evolving spirit that humans have, and yeah, that is the bigger and the more ulterior purpose that everyone who's getting into what they want to do or trying to find what they want to do for the rest of their lives, they should really keep this in mind. Yeah, for this is for all the people who are going to get into undergrad really soon and are all looking for some interesting courses, because I know I'm going to take a few of these if I have the space. Yeah, about Indigenous 550, which is voice, justice, and change. I think that brings us to a very nice conclusion about all of this, and how does this one word that I'm really fascinated by here is change. How does that happen? What's the change?
Yeah, that course codes is interdisciplinary 550. So it's looking at the grad studies. No, I get tripped up over all the acronyms as well in course codes. But yeah, and that's been what we called regularized. So it's now a permanent course on the books, which is Interdisciplinary Studies 596, I believe is the course code now. So yeah, Voice, Justice, and Change was a class that was, I was lucky enough to design in conversation with a number of students and faculty in what's called the Community Engagement, Social Change, and Equity graduate theme. So we have interdisciplinary graduate themes here, which are super interesting. And that class was designed to have an explicitly justice-based focus within that program, which was there, but it didn't have, the same level of required courses and things like that of other programs. But I won't get too much into specifics, but that's a bit of the background. And I say that because the change aspect of the class, we get to, like, how when I taught the class and designed it, and I haven't taught it for the last year or two, is the first month we talk about voice, the second month we talk about justice, and the third month, and towards the end, we talk about change. And part of that is understanding the different perspectives, theories, and sort of ways of engaging with these ideas from community, but also structural perspectives. So we don't look into these topics from like the philosophical, like European sort of perspective, of which there's long traditions within those disciplines within those areas. But we foreground, again, the work of communities who students within the community engagement, social change, and equity graduate theme are most often working with for their graduate programs. So we ensure, again, going back to the voices of communities who may not have been able to profile or to be able to share their own knowledges of what knowledge even means to them because of all of the things we talked about in the other aspects of our discussion. So by the time we get to change, the way that I've taught it previously is we look at what change means from different sort of institutional levels, from different scales, to use a geography term. So from an individual level to a community level, maybe to an institutional level, a government level, a global level. We've also read sort of short stories and speculative fiction. So one of my favorite authors, actually favorite author of all time in terms of fiction, is someone named Octavia Butler, and she writes this fantastic series called the Parable series. And one of the things that the protagonist in that series continuously talks about is that the only constant thing in the world is change.
Yeah.
And we have read some of that speculative fiction in the class, but we also talk about what does that mean, within the course of our graduate programs, because it's obviously tailored to grad students, in terms of outside the classroom, how people engage with one another, how everything from our interpersonal dynamics, how we treat one another, how we interact with one another, is reflective in some way, shape, or form, oftentimes, of experiences that we've had, or also the institutions or the societies in which we come from. So, for example, we were in Geog 217, Geography of BC, earlier today, and a guest speaker was talking about how relationships of extraction also mirror sort of a desire for control. Yeah. And what does that mean when we look at it, say, with a gendered lens, thinking of, Geog 358, or for a lens critical of the histories of British Columbia, or for students who are looking at designing their own research for their graduate studies. What does that sort of thinking about interpersonal dynamics and relationships and how those can scale up to be reflective, but also to then sort of assert themselves on a community level? What does that mean? And at that point, when we get to the change aspect, we've had, 2 and a bit months of consistently talking with one another, engaging with course materials. So we've all sort of learned along each other to get to that point. And we end up having a lot of really powerful discussions around what that looks like. And also then students being able to think about, what are both the strengths and the limitations of those perspectives within their own graduate research. So.
That's also very interesting. I mean, all of this is super interesting. I mean, I'm gonna sound very redundant at this point of the podcast, but yeah, it actually is very interesting and fascinating. Good. And thank you for having me here and telling me all about that you did, man. Yeah, I'm so gonna take one of these classes, depending on what kind of prereqs I have and what courses I've already taken. But yes, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.